Today, I feel extremely excited and blessed to have a scholar here with us, whose name you probably know if you're in the field of information science. If you're not, essentially one of the most cited um, theoretical framework in the field of information science was created by no more than Dr. Carol Kuhlthau. I hope I say your name right this time. Perfect. And thank you so much for coming. Welcome to our my little mini channel, YouTube channel. And basically, what we'll be discussing with Dr. Kuhlthau is not only the theoretical framework, but also the story behind it. Because if you are embarking in any journey within the academia or within the industry, you probably are quite aware of the fact that research is a huge part of it, coming up with ideas and exploring, etc. But strategizing, positioning it, all these sort of back-end job that people really don't see for your work to be known and to be sort of respected is a whole another story. And so we're hoping that today we'll get a glimpse of what Dr. Kuhlthau went through back then. So thank you again for joining us. To start with, would you please maybe at a very high level, because people are already obviously familiar with the ISP model, but just a little bit at a high level, what is ISP model and how do you even get into it to start with?
Okay. Well, I'm very pleased to have this conversation with you. It's so interesting for me to look back on how this all began and how it evolved through the years. And I'm still working on it, which is really amazing. It's still working on it. So let me just start to say that I see women's lives as different than men's lives. And maybe that has changed a bit since I began my work, but I had a lot of roles in my lives. I was a mother. Well, I was a wife first and a mother. And my family was really important to me. So it wasn't career first and then family. It had to be all together. I married young. My husband and I married when I was 20 and he was 21. And that wasn't unusual then. It's very unusual today, but
very unusual.
Very unusual. And right, my grandchildren are all, kind of thinking of marriage around 30. So that's, but we were married young, and I I taught in an elementary school while my husband went to law school. And I became intrigued with learning. I taught first graders, and it was fascinating to me to see how they learned. It wasn't so much how I taught them, but how they were able to learn. And that continued on. That began the ideas that I developed later on. Very important part of my thinking. I then, we started our family, and I had 3 daughters. We had 3 lovely babies. And when my youngest daughter, Leslie, was 4 years old, my husband and I started talking about it. He said, you love teaching. You loved that job. He said, why don't you go on with your career? Now, just think of that. That's a very unusual thing for a man in the 60s to say to his wife. My husband was a very successful trial lawyer and later trial judge. And so he had a very, very strong and demanding career. But he said, why don't you go ahead? And so I did go back for my master's degree in library science, today called Library and Information Science. And I went to Rutgers. We lived in the New Brunswick area. And so Rutgers was 10 minutes from my house. The university was 10 minutes from my house. That was a very important thing for me because, again, I'm thinking of balancing all of these roles all the way through my career. I'm balancing these roles. So Rutgers at that time had a strong information science area, not specialization, but area. And that was unusual in the library schools, what we used to call library schools. But I took those information science courses as well as the library courses, and I knew I was specializing in school librarianship. Again, a choice that is made because it fits with my family. So I then in 1974, that's when I got my master's degree, I went to work as a school librarian in the same town that my children were in school, in that same school, which again is a decision because the same vacations, the same hours, it all worked with the family. You see what I'm saying? That these
Yes.
are not, these were choices that I made very consciously. And so I then went to another school district after 5 years in the school district where I was living and my children were in school. I went to another school district that gave me a different opportunity. And that was exciting for me. Now I'm going along the line of the career, and there's so many more years. But then I wrote my first book. And that book was called, it had a horrible name, but it was a very important book at that time. And it was called School Librarians, Grade by Grade Activities Program. Isn't that a name?
Yes.
But that book was a book that filled a gap that wasn't there and that wasn't filled, that needed to be filled. And that was that school librarians are going to be teachers. They're going to be working with a curriculum. They're going to have a sequential curriculum throughout the grades. And so that book was very popular. Then when I was in that same district, I was invited to be the high school librarian, the director of the high school library. Big high school, very dynamic high school, very diverse for the time. Lots of young families coming in and trying to give opportunities for their children to go off to college, maybe first children to go to college, which I was also. I'm the first in my family to go to college. Not only there's just the first woman, I'm the first in my family. Just to let you know that, that's important.
That's amazing.
That's important, yeah. So okay, I'm at this high school, and my children now my 3 daughters are in high school. I love being with teenagers at that time. They're so funny and so much fun, and they're in such there's so many opportunities in that stage of life. And you can make it's so easy to make mistakes. So I love being with them. But I decided to enter a doctoral program. Again, a discussion with my husband, and he always encouraged me. He said, yeah, go ahead. And I would be the one who would really hesitate. And he would say, try it for a year. That's what he always said to me. Try it for a year. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. But it always worked.
Brilliant advice.
Good advice. Try it for a year, because you could do it. You could do anything for a year. It won't ruin everything. Right. So, and looking at the balance of your life. So what I'm saying to you is I didn't have a career path in my mind. What I was interested in all the way along was learning in libraries. How do children learn? How do you help them learn in a library? How do they learn? So it's not so much about teaching.
Okay.
And this is a pattern that I followed through, and I still am interested in that question. How do people learn? And you've looked at how the the brain activates at certain points, and you can actually see the learning. It's
Right.
intriguing to me. So I was studying Kelly in my program at Rutgers. Again, I went to Rutgers, which was 10 minutes from my home. Excellent program, wonderful director of that program. That I went to the School of Ed. I did not, my doctorate is not in library and information science.
Hmm.
So again, there's another something unique about my work. It's on the border of several different disciplines. It's on the border of education. It's on the border of libraries. It's on the border of information science. It's on the border of psychology.
Yes.
So, so then I had the opportunity right in front of me to do that, the dissertation that looked at basically how people construct knowledge from various sources of information, and how difficult that is, how much turmoil it causes in a person when what they're trying to understand doesn't match what they already know. And that's what Kelly explained. And I noticed that the students were having difficulty with early stages of the research paper, of their research assignments. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because they have all the sources right there, but and they weren't getting any help. I was giving them sources, but they weren't really getting any help with how to think through the kinds of difficult questions they were coming across in the information they were finding. So that's how the information search process started. I worked with those students for a year, 2 research papers, and I had them a lot of the time because their teacher was one of my colleagues in my doctoral program. he was ABD, but I did finish mine. You would have thought it would be the other way around at the time, but it didn't work out that way. So that I never had the idea that I was taking a doctorate because I was going to have this great career and be a professor in a university. I was interested in the idea. How does learning take place? How does this work? And that's one thing I would really advise people to think about. What is it that really intrigues you? Because that's what makes creativity. That's what makes you do something that is different than someone else is doing.
And did you do that then for your dissertation? Is that when the ISP
That was my
started?
dissertation.
So you
That's the
actually-
ISP.
Wow. So you actually started from your dissertation and basically expanded on it for the following 20 years or something.
That's exactly right.
Wow, that's amazing.
I stuck with the same problem.
That's
But
really
that
amazing.
first study, I found out so much about those stages, and I was able to identify those stages. And
How
I
did
called
you
it the
start
library
even,
research process.
and how did you even start thinking about they're probably stages, or I should probably document this? Because that process is very interesting as to how did you even start thinking about it?
Yeah, I thought about it be, because Kelly, I
That's
read
Kelly.
Kelly, and Kelly had stages in the process of construction.
Yes.
And when I first read his theory, I thought it just seemed too abstract and not. And then all of a sudden, I was looking at those students, and I thought, "Whoa, wait a minute! They're in that stage of uncertainty, and that causes a lot of frustration and anxiety in Kelly's model." I
Yes.
thought, I'm going to look into that and see if and so then you try to think of, well, how would you find out? How would you get inside the person's head to be
Yes.
able. And so I used a lot of different methods: journaling, short pieces of writing at different points. Um, and then those major interviews were a huge help. And I used lots of different things. I used timelines. I had them draw timelines. I had them do flow charts. I had access to those students, and they were able to do all those things.
And at what point did you feel like, okay, now I have enough data, whether it was interview notes or observation, et cetera, that all the methodology that you just mentioned, that you felt comfortable that you have enough data to now insert it and create that model, ISP model?
Okay, here we're going to go back to the practical.
Mhm.
Always, I had a family at home. I had a husband who I loved dearly and needed to support him as well as he supported me. So I had given myself a certain period of time. I was also an age. This is something that's important too. I'm into my 40s.
Mm.
I get my master's degree in my 30s. And so I'm already into my 40s, and I'm 45.
Mm.
So I'm saying, whoa, wait a minute. I have a certain period of time. I'm not a young woman any longer. If I'm going to be able to do this, I have to do it in this period of time. So I set that period of time. That's not always the way it works, but I did set the 1 year for collecting the data.
I see.
And by the end of that year, I was able to see Kelly's stages. And I was able to then use it as a model of what a person might experience particularly students might experience in the process of putting together new ideas for a research paper.
Great. And so that year of data collection basically gave birth to the ISP model. That is how you insert it.
That's
Because
exactly
I think
right.
I also read somewhere that you basically dedicated about 20 years into, you know, working on the ISP model. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can tell you about that because I wasn't sure what was going to happen after I finished the dissertation. And my thesis advisor said, "This is a breakthrough dissertation. This is something new," which was, she did not offer compliments easily. And I remember that to this day. I thought, oh,
Those are
good,
the best
good.
feedback, I think.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And but I didn't have a job. I mean, oh yes, I had to have a job. I was director of a high school library, and I really didn't have any prospect for a job, a university job, because Rutgers doesn't hire their own.
I see.
So I was stuck, but Rutgers needed the library and information science department needed someone to come and direct the school library
Wow.
specialization. And they called on me. They
Mm.
called me. Someone on my committee was on that faculty, and they called me. And so I came and I interviewed, and I don't know if they interviewed anybody else, but so I was at Rutgers. So here I am, 48 years old. I have a family who are going off to college. My youngest daughter is going off to college that year. My oldest daughter was married that year.
Mm.
And I am ready. Okay, I have 20 years ahead of me. And that's what I did. In the next 20 years, I worked on many, many, many ideas that grew out of that. And a lot of large studies, many of them funded. And it was just
Perfect.
really amazing. Now, for a woman, I know you're particularly interested in
Yes.
women, and I was really you see how I was hired. I was hired as a woman. I was hired, oh, she's a super librarian, so we'll have her come. And I'm going to say something here that I probably shouldn't say, but I'm going to say something here that I think will be helpful for people.
Please.
I'm not sure the people who hired me thought I would get tenure.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I'm just telling you that I was hired because they needed somebody
Mm.
to boost up that program that was dying. They needed somebody, and the ALA was coming, and the certification people were coming, and they needed somebody, and they definitely got the right person.
Politics.
But that I didn't realize that till later.
Mm.
But then every time I came up for promotion, I was extremely ready to be promoted. But let me just say too, about getting published in that first paper that you published. I was not an academic writer. I had a book published. I had 2 books published at that point because I wrote another book called The Library Research Process, which was a how-to book. Both of those were how-to books. But my first paper, I couldn't get published.
Mm.
That's the paper that you heard the other day on Janice Hartel's YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
That paper was really hard to get published
Mm.
because it was such a different idea that it didn't seem to fit anywhere.
Mm.
And it wasn't just that I was a woman, but it was a different idea. And it was so interesting to hear that she pulled that paper, because that's not the most highly cited paper, but it's a really good paper. Yeah, that most highly cited paper is the inside the information search process in JASIS, which is the validation paper that shows, after all the other studies.
The one from 1999?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I cited that a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sort of the paper that people cite. But this other paper told how I actually worked to find the ISP model.
Wow.
Which is just what you're asking, the original study, that how I did that. And so it wasn't always women who mentored me. And mentoring is a funny thing. I one day just passed one of the senior men scholars in the hallway who hadn't given me much attention, that's for sure. And I said, I can't get this paper published and I need it published. And he took a look at it and he said, he told me the journal to send it to. And I didn't even, and so if you want to call that mentoring, whatever you want to call that, but I've had that happen many, many times, that someone will say to me, oh, do this. And it's really the answer. And it isn't always a woman.
No, exactly. So did he tell you are you talking about the paper that you published in 1999 that he said?
No, this is the paper from 88.
That's the one. Yeah. Okay. That's the one that did not get published.
It's way back, and I was so surprised that she pulled it out. I had kind of forgotten about it myself.
Gotcha.
But that paper was very important because it set it was the paper that described the first study, clearly described that first study. And that first study was important. It was very important. And I always kept that in my mind, that study in my mind, because I could picture those stages as those kids went through the stages and how they explained it and how they talked about it.
Yeah, I love that because you're right. Sometimes you just bump into people and sometimes you hardly know them, but they say something. But it also happens to me when I watch a lot of educational YouTube videos, like, scholars doing interviews like this. And also, I feel like sometimes I hear something, it's just one sentence, and it could potentially change everything. So, Yeah, I love that. So I have also, so that's great. Thank you so much. This is so exciting, by the way, for me to also know kind of the story behind it. But how did you even position it such that gradually it became more and more cited, more and more, I guess, people start taking it seriously, if you will, because um, I don't know how it was back then, but at least today, it's just, I mean, with the birth of social media for the past, what, 20 years, 15 years, that it's just a lot of information overload. There's just, sometimes I feel like even things that should not be published or even talked about, they're out there just because we can. So it's a little bit hard to go through that sort of noise, but I can only imagine that at your time there was still noise, because there's always, every time, I think, in space, time and space, they have their own challenges. How did you cut through those sort of noises and position it such that it eventually became a very established, respected, known, and cited paper, not for the citation's sake, but to your point, because this was a discovery that
Mhm.
people had to pay attention to, not because it's cool to be published. You know what I mean? How did you maneuver
Mhm.
those challenges?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm in a program that's one of the top programs in the field,
Mm,
and I need to get tenure.
mm,
I need to get promoted, and so that is my work. That's what I need to do. I'm in that position, but what I did was join. I took advice from a lot of people. I listened to how other people were um, presenting their work. And I realized that ALA was one place, but ACES was a very important place and was a different group of people. And then through ACES, I found some international. I
mm,
started being noticed internationally and being invited to various different conferences. And Finland was the first international place that I actually presented the uncertainty principle, which was kind of a little fun to think that through as a library and information science uncertainty principle. But those kinds of ideas, I just kept working on those ideas, not for a particular presentation, but once I was ready with the idea, then I would say, well, I'll try this out in this organization or that organization. So I definitely started writing papers and putting and making proposals for presentations, and I did a lot of traveling during that time.
That's what I mean. It seems like you did not just do your dissertation and said, okay, goodbye. You were actually very
Oh no.
proactive
Mhm.
afterwards. Because I think I see that a lot. People just sort of stop at the dissertation and then they get a job and then that's it. But it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were really proactive. You found the
Mhm.
connections, in this case at ACES. You even traveled to Europe. I mean, not a lot of people do that, and then build your sort of connection there. Do you feel like that is how, um, what helped in terms of positioning it, or was it anything else?
It really helped, and it challenged me with the ideas. So people
Mm,
would question the ideas. To, how do you, and that was tremendously helpful.
mm,
And then the, I really stuck with the Finnish at that time. A lot of the Finns were thinking about these ideas in information science. And I began debating and talking to them. And so these conferences were really important. They were work conferences, thinking conferences. And I sought people out who had good ideas and who were interested in ideas.
and were you presenting at the conferences or were
Mhm.
you just attending?
Presenting.
Oh, wow. Because I know that the process of even getting a spot to present, even if it's a lightning talk, it's pretty competitive. You have to do the work, you have to write the specific paper for it, and it may or may not be accepted. But to your point, because you also had the support of the Rutgers University, and it
Mhm.
kind of afforded you to at least be taken to some extent seriously in the
Yeah.
beginning. That
Yes,
kind of,
that's a yes.
yeah.
I had the Rutgers reputation,
Yeah,
and I felt that. I felt that I had to do, I had to do respectable work, but I was intrigued with the ideas. It was hard work. I
absolutely.
worked
I believe
very,
you.
very hard.
I believe you.
All through those years, I worked really, really hard, and teaching a full load,
Yes.
and everything, serving on committees, all of that. But I have to say, I looked for opportunities and I took every opportunity that was presented to me.
I get that feeling too from hearing from everything you've shared with us, sort of reading between the lines. It feels to me that also your personality is such that it's the curious mind, a combination of a curious mind with, willing to work hard, but at the same time also honoring your family and
Yeah,
etc. And
yeah.
so making sure that that happened. But it's still very interesting to me because it's still, I don't know back then, but it's still in today's world is pretty challenging to go through all that and still make it, if that makes sense. Because some people, I think, in life, everybody goes after different things, nothing right or wrong with that. Some people go after money, some people go after knowledge, some people go after family. And so it really, but whatever we do, it feels like we still need to sacrifice, at least to some extent, some part of it,
Mhm.
because it's hard to, have it all.
Yeah, you can't really have it all. And I did
Yes.
sacrifice a couple of things. I had to drop my women friends.
Mm.
We and our social life pretty much. I used to
Same
do a lot
here.
of a lot of dinner parties and a lot of, all kinds of things,
No social life here.
and no social life. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that fit with my husband's career because judges are very limited in who they associate with. They don't associate. I don't think a lot of people know that,
For the
but
reputation's sake, or
ethics. You have to
oh,
be very
ethics.
careful of
Huh.
not socializing with lawyers who are presenting before you in court.
Conflict of
There's
interest.
conflict, yeah. So my husband was particularly um, conscious of that, and so we didn't. But so I'm that's sort of a personal thing. But I also had good opportunities. I good advice.
Hmm.
And that advice, a lot of that advice came from women who were in other universities who I would meet at conferences. And someone would come up to me and say, "You have to meet this person." And then it would be another person who was just full of ideas and full of, kind of interesting ways of looking at things.
Brilliant.
So no matter what conference I went to, I didn't just go to a conference. I presented at the conference and I met for lunch or breakfast and dinner with various different people who I wanted to touch base with. So I plot out what I was going to do at a conference.
That
So it
sounds
wasn't
amazing.
relaxing, it was work.
So talking about advice, my last question for you is that if for any young scholar or aspired a person who aspires to be a scholar, or not even scholar, just anybody, what advice do you have, maybe those who are starting their industry or academic career or even thinking about it? Any advice you may have, we would love to hear that.
Well, I guess a couple of things. One thing is you have a whole life. You're a whole person. and you don't want to lose that. You want to nurture your, physical and mental and spiritual and all of that. That's one thing I would really advise. And I have really been rewarded in that area. I have 3 lovely daughters and I have 6 terrific grandchildren, and I have a relationship with each of them. So that's first, I would say. You're a person beside. The other thing is work. And I was so fortunate to find work that I was intrigued with, and I stuck with that problem. Now, some people have worked much more broadly than I did, and that's good, and that's good. It's unusual for someone to be so centered on one particular idea, but I didn't see anybody else working on it. And I needed to continue to pursue it. And so that is one thing I would say. If you find something like that, don't drop it after your dissertation. And you're right. A lot of people drop the center idea. And I've often asked people, why didn't you continue to pursue that? It was such an original idea. But I also was questioned by some people as I went along about pursuing so narrowly and sticking with one idea. And I had to defend that and say, well, it's not done yet. I have more to do in this and more to find out. So that's basically what I would say. And I think the spiritual side of life is very important. Maybe I didn't say that, but all of this comes together to make you a whole person. And now that I'm in my 80s, it's even all the more important that I have a full life.
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of one of the quotes from Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it went something like, because people would come apparently to him and say, you're very smart and how did you do it, etc. And he's like, well, I'm like everybody else. I just stay with the problems longer.
I don't think that was true with Einstein completely, but it is true. Stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, he's humble enough to say, I don't know anything, but the fact that the last part that he said, I just stay with the problems longer.
Yeah.
And I think especially in the fast pace of our lives, we just want to go from one thing to another. But I think it also comes down to the passion. Like if you're very passionate about a topic, you just can't. In my case, for example, I wished I could switch it off, but I can't.
Yeah.
I can't stop thinking about this. Right. And to your point, there's no social life because there's so much other things I could be doing, but I just, so thank you so much. This was amazing. I totally enjoyed your having conversation with you. And I think that it was amazing to hear the story behind, because any of the scientific discovery that we see, there's always a story behind that, unfortunately kind of remains hidden. But I think that I love the fact that you shared with us how you gave birth to it, how did you even position it, what was the challenges that you were going through. And I'm with family and everything else, obviously to your point, that's different when you're a woman than a man, but I think nonetheless this was amazing. Thank you so much excuse me, for your time. Really, really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute, but before that, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers? You don't have to, of course, if you don't want to.
I just find what keeps you up at night.
Perfect.
Yeah, and kind of pursue it.
Yeah. That perfect quote. Thank you so much again, and we really, truly, really appreciate your time. Thank you.